Before I introduce our final wrap-up speaker, who probably has the most difficult task of the day, I just think this has been such an extraordinary day, and everybody has really worked hard. Everybody in this room needs to give themselves a round of applause. Because while Global Partners has put together, I think, an extraordinary program today, it would not have been extraordinary without your participation. And so for our last formal aspect of the day today, we've asked my good friend, Richard Briffault, who is a professor at Columbia University's Law School. In fact, he is the Joseph Chamberlain Professor of Legislation at Columbia Law School, to do the wrap-up for us today. And let me just tell you a little bit about Richard, who probably won't tell you too much about himself. Some people are tremendous self-promoters. Other people just do a lot. Richard is one of those people who just does a lot. And not only is he a successful law professor here at Columbia University, he did work in government for Governor Hugh Carey in the state government of New York. And he is the co-author of State and Local Government Law, which is a text that if you go to law school in the United States and are interested in municipal and state law, you will be reading Richard's book. It's an extraordinary opus, and my son, who has just started law school, apparently has been assigned this book. So he said, "Isn't this Richard Briffault? Don't we know him?" I said, "Yes." And feel free to ask him any questions of clarification. Richard's also done work in campaign finance law and in the area of our conference today, urban economic development. He was one of the first people to write about business improvement districts, both from a legal and political perspective. And I think he's gotten a lot of invitations to speak as a result of kind of transformative work in that field from a legal perspective. He's actually currently working on a book on campaign finance law, a very dangerous field. And he is the vice chair of Citizens Union, a good government group in New York. He received his BA from Columbia College and his law degree from Harvard Law School, which we say very quietly around here. And he is probably one of the most creative, intelligent, and nicest people I know at Columbia Law School. Welcome, Richard Briffault.
Thank you, Esther, for that very generous introduction, and thank you to your son for the royalties. I don't get much, but I get something, and that's as close as I get to actually being an entrepreneur and an innovator. This really has been an extraordinary day. I congratulate you all for being here after what I counted as one conversation, 6 panels, and one speaker, and one lunchtime speaker. People who hail from the speakers that we heard today. I'm not going to rattle off all the mayors again. You've heard that many times. But the speakers, by my count, came from 8 different cities on 5 different continents. So we really had an extraordinary array of talent speaking to you today. I'd like to join again in thanking Columbia University for sponsoring this, New York City Global Partners, the corporate sponsors, GE, and the World Bank. And I put in a special thanks to our translators, who played a vital role at various points in today's program. I'm going to begin with one thought, which is an American politician. He was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, named Tip O'Neill, is famous for saying all politics is local. So the first lesson I get from today is that all economic development is local, or to pick up specifically with our themes of today, innovation and entrepreneurship are local. Local in 2 senses. One, which Sanjay Pradhan, our luncheon speaker, emphasized, was that development is local and not national. Or that the engines of development, the engines of innovation and entrepreneurship are our cities. And for some of the reasons that as he pointed out to us, no country has achieved great economic success without creating great cities. Why cities? As he reminded us again, cities for 2 things. One is the cities have particular density, the agglomeration of people, of activities, of creativity. These all matter. Cities are the focal points of the exchange of ideas, of innovation, of the particular intensity of people consumers, markets that together promote entrepreneurship and innovation. And so in that sense, cities are essential. Cities are the engines. Cities are the focal points of innovation. The other reason why we might want to think about all innovation as local is the point made by Jeff Immelt in the conversation he had with Mayor Bloomberg this morning, which is the notion that our markets are inevitably local. As he pointed out, we don't have one national health market, we have 50, and probably the same thing could be said about many other pretty basic markets. Cities are also economic arenas. Each particular city or particular local region, I want to talk a little bit more about that later, has its particular needs, its particular concerns, its particular customers, its particular cultures. And it's out of this sort of forcing arena that we get innovation. The other way in which all economic development is local is that cities are all different. One thing that was very striking today as we listened to all the different speakers, although there were a lot of common themes, and I'll get to those in a second, what was also striking is that there were different practices, different ideas, different initiatives that we really heard about 8 different laboratories. And while a lot of them tried the same experiments and got similar results, some of them were trying new experiments, new things that focus on different industries, different way of pulling industries together, different uses of incubators or of tax breaks or different focuses. And so we have both the similarity that they're all coming from big cities, really all from global cities focused on promoting innovation, and there were common themes in what they did, but also with the thing that comes back as always, there's going to be differences. So what have we learned today? We've learned a lot about what local governments can do. So in some ways, we're moving now from, I think, the notion that innovation and entrepreneurship are going to be local to a large degree to the role of local government, because I think that was really a significant focus, both of our public sector speakers and of our private sector speakers, and of the many people, and I'll get to that later, who bridge the public and the private sector. And I want to think about, I was really struck by the way in which Sanjay Pradhan framed it as the 3 different theories of what cities can do. I would vary that slightly and present them not as alternatives, but as a spectrum. Things where from the least to the most, and we can debate about whether the most is always appropriate, and I think there was the most debate about the most, but I think you can see them as a range of possibilities. One is the bare minimum, the get out of the way idea, which is to put it in a more positive sense and to pick up some of the statements of Mayor Bloomberg and Mr. Immelt at the beginning of the day, minimize unnecessary regulation. Make sure regulations serve their intended purpose and don't do more. Get rid of unnecessary permits. And we heard a lot about this afternoon in the discussion about the developments of the New York City Department of Business Services. Think about when there are multiple agencies who have oversee the same function. Think about when there are multiple requirements that are leading, or multiple licenses or multiple permits that are necessary for the same activity. Think about that. Engage in regulatory reviews. See if we can strip down unnecessary regulation and so we figure out which regulations are unnecessary. That's probably the main point. And then simplify our regulatory system. And also, as I think our speakers in the morning conversation talked about, have reasonable tax policies. So at the very least, government should not get in the way, which is not to say that government is always in the way, but when government does regulate for important reasons, for reasons of public safety or for consumer protection, for other purposes, make sure the regulation does what it's supposed to do and not more. But I think almost everybody here who spoke was speaking about doing something more than that, although that's an important basic minimum which we should never forget, but about doing something more. Second was, I guess, is the field of dreams model. Government as setting the stage, setting the framework, creating the conditions, the general background conditions for successful economic activity. Some of the stuff is at its most basic. I think the mayor referred to sound public finance, basic physical infrastructure, roads and mass transit and airports, railroads and strong, modern information, communication, and technology systems, educational systems for a good workforce, housing, adequate housing and office space to make sure that there is space for economic activity to occur, and a theme that was hit many times today, quality of life, which is a kind of an all-encompassing term, but from, again, the most basic, the idea of clean and safe, the city should be clean and cities should be safe and cities should be attractive places, to more than that, to parks and amenities, the beaches of Tel Aviv, to having a vibrant cultural life. Because in a world of mobile capital and mobile talent, cities need to be the kinds of places where people want to be and can engage in economic activity. So that was sort of a second place along the way, and even that has its gradations from, I think, the most basic of just having sort of roads and electrical systems to more stronger methods to promote local cultural activities, sponsoring special events, sponsoring Olympics, sponsoring entertainment, improving parks. Next along the spectrum is what to use a word that I hate it when people use it, but it has entered the vocabulary, more proactive. It seems to me active is active enough, but I guess proactive is probably the word we have to use. There, the word that came up the most today was incubators. I'm not sure anybody actually quite defined what an incubator was, and I still think of little eggs that make chickens or something. But I think I get the idea that there are emerging businesses or possible businesses, early ideas, little eggs, that need some place to warm up. And so they need access, as we were told about in New York and in Cape Town and elsewhere, to reduced cost office space. They need access to business equipment and to computers. They may be having to sharing facilities. You may not need to be there for all day, but you have part of the day. You need meeting space. You need just the basic bare physical infrastructure to get your business together, and that's something that cities can provide. One step up from that, a little bit more active, was training and mentoring. We heard a lot about that today. I think the presentation of the hot bread kitchens was really very fascinating about just the very notion that people have a good idea for a business, but they may lack any skills in finance, in accounting, in business planning, in marketing. And this is something that cities or other organizations, I want to get to in a minute, so who we talk when we say the city, who do we mean exactly, but something that kind of assistance that can be provided in a very small scale, these basic training and mentoring, and several of the speakers talked about this, and business skills. Then there was the thing that I think kept coming up in different ways. It was all those C words that I kept hearing: convening, connecting, and clustering. So maybe one step more is that cities and other supporters can bring people together. Again, there's a little nervousness about just how far they do that, but they do that. Some of it is physical, in a building, in a disused market, or in a region, in the Tech Mile in Tel Aviv, or in business parks in Stockholm. They can bring people together. And who are they bringing together? Businesses getting brought together with businesses, so they can find partners, people who have a common interest in the same business, or exchange technology. Business being brought to big businesses and small businesses. Big businesses looking for something to invest in, small that can pick up some tips and some skills. Established businesses and startups. New businesses and lenders need to be brought together. One looking for a source of capital, the other looking for an investment opportunity. Businesses and nonprofits need to be brought together. Nonprofits sometimes as providers of additional assistance, sometimes as providers of capital. A lot we heard about is business and universities. The speakers from Berlin were very articulate about that, connecting universities and universities and universities and businesses, again, as sources of innovation, as sources of information and ideas and of capital, and businesses and government, businesses and customers, excuse me. Again, different ways in which what government can do in its activities and its convening and connecting and clustering is bring these different parties together so that once they're together, they can exchange ideas, they can exchange information, they can exchange money, all of which is important for developing innovation and entrepreneurship. Next thing the government could do is, and we heard a lot about this afternoon, was help new businesses deal with government itself. This in some ways is another version of the reduce the amount of government, but there may be at some point regulations are necessary. There are regulations that are necessary to deal with land use planning and are necessary to make sure our buildings don't fall down, and that basic safety requirements are met by people in the food industry, but they still have permits and licenses and inspections, and something government can do is help new businesses navigate this process. And navigate is the term I'm picking up from the Department of Small Business Services, but I think it's the right one. Helping people who are new to the system work the system. They can also help with, there are many programs out there to help new businesses, federal, state, local, private, so government can help them navigate the applications process. Again, we heard about this from the Hot Bread Kitchen as well. One of the things that the incubator can do is literally sit down with people and help them apply for monies that is available to them for various government incentive programs. So government can help on that. Government can do this can help this by developing good online programs. Government can do this by good on-site facilities. Government can do this by creating specialized agencies that do this, like something like a Department of Small Business Services, which is oriented to helping, to convening and connecting and navigating to get businesses going, not actually innovating itself, although these are, in some sense, these are the government versions of innovation. Government isn't, one thing that you learn today is that government is also innovative and entrepreneurial. It may not be selling things to the outside, on the open market, but what we heard a lot today was a lot about innovative and entrepreneurial government in service to, or in assistance to, or facilitating innovative and entrepreneurial business. Then the furthest step along the spectrum, and I think here begins to get a little more controversial, is more direct government assistance to businesses. Some of it involves provision of land. The land that New York City is offering for the new School of Engineering. Or sometimes a number of our speakers talked about, in effect, repurposing land that had previously been used for manufacturing or for industries that are dying or have gone, and making that land available to new activities. Sometimes that could be made broadly available, as in some of the incubators and sort of broader business parks, but sometimes we're talking about providing it to individual firms. Improvements to that land as well, infrastructure investments that are targeted to helping a specific place. And then we also heard about capital. And I think there was probably the most, I wouldn't call it disagreement exactly, but the most uncertainty as to what extent should government be involved making direct assistance to new businesses, or maybe more properly, I think there was a lot of nervousness about government taking on those kinds of risks, but maybe government doing it through intermediaries. Government providing some funds to not-for-profit organizations, which in turn raise other funds and then themselves go ahead and make the seed money grants or the investments. But I think it was, as I heard this today, I think there was lots of excitement and interest in development and everything along the spectrum, and then a little bit of uncertainty about the very end. And I think that's something to take home and think about. What ways can we continue to harness the assets that government brings while checking the nervousness about government playing favorites, or government, or that being a more politicized process. Next thought, and really just have a couple more. One that strikes me again is the multiplicity of layers, and this is probably just part of the nature of urban life. Most of I think the title of today was City Strategies, and our focus was on cities, but a number of the speakers were taking us, I would say, higher and lower, although that's maybe a bad sense of hierarchy. Smaller and bigger is probably more accurate. A number of our speakers were talking about really doing this at the community level. For some of our big global cities like New York, the city is just too big to think about doing this effectively. The only cities that has to be the only entity for doing this. Some development occurs in communities like the Union Square Partnership. And presumably this is true of many of our other big cities, is you need to have, just as we say that the virtue of cities relative to the nation state is that they can be attentive to distinctive local needs, circumstances, and preferences and stakeholders. So within a big city, a neighborhood, people who are working at the neighborhood level can be attentive to the particular needs and circumstances and preferences and participants at that very local level. And so I think we need to have that community-based level as well as the city level. And at the other end, we need to think about metropolitan regions. A number of the speakers, I think, from Barcelona and Lyon and Tel Aviv and Berlin talked about either metropolitan regions or states that encompass cities. Municipal boundaries don't always match economic regions. In the United States, they almost never do. Other countries may be better at this, at being able to match legal and political boundaries with economic and social entities. We're pretty bad at it. And so it's one of the things we need to think about. And a number of the speakers that address that is the need to create entities, whether they're government entities or public-private entities that think bigger, that address some of the issues that should be addressed broader. So it may be that we want some things that are working very local in identifying small businesses, and some that are working much bigger in terms of issues like infrastructure. And that gets me to kind of a final set of points. One has to do with the entities we're talking about. There's what is striking is the variety of entities. Just as we could put on a spectrum the different kinds of things that we want to have, that we're talking about having done, the actors also string out across the spectrum. From the purely public, Department of Small Business Services, a city agency appointed by an elected mayor, to the purely private, particular organizations, a number of cities, New York City Partnership and comparable organizations elsewhere, consisting solely, the Barcelona Global, consisting solely of CEOs or executives of private firms, and hybrids, public-private organizations where their board members are both public and private, where the funding is both public and private, or even more complex structures where cities create private entities or for-profit entities create not-for-profit entities. This is a big issue in the United States because of tax reasons, but there may be similar issues in other countries. It's the complexity of the arrangements, I think, is a tribute to the innovative developments in the public sector in thinking about these things, but that does mean that we have a range of tools that can be used depending on the kind of thing you're thinking about. Provision of land might be one thing, provision of advice might be something else, provision of capital might be yet something else. Second, next to final point, is the need for strategies. One thing that the speakers over and over again emphasized, the importance to have strategies that will last in the medium and long run, whether that's creation of new institutional structures, like a new city agency, or a new public-private local development corporation or public-private corporation that can last for a while, whether it's creating new programs, whether it's focusing on specific goals. And different cities had different goals in terms of what they want to emphasize. Some wanted to go into biotech. Some wanted to think about their universities. Some wanted to go into clean energy. You have to come up with strategies, some of which may be institutional and some of which may involve the targets of your spending. Different cities articulated very different focuses for where they want to put their money and what kind of institutions they want to use. Next to final point, this has to connect to other goals. I think innovation and entrepreneurship are to some extent they're ends in themselves, because obviously we're all concerned about the jobs problem during the current economic crisis. But many of our speakers and many of the programs they discussed were connecting them to other things. Stockholm was talking to us about clean energy and sustainability. Jeff Immelt was talking to us about affordable health care. If I think about the presentation about the hot bread kitchen, I'm thinking about the social and economic integration of immigrants. Or we heard about how many in Nigeria, every day 250 new people come into the major cities. So a lot of this it's partly about jobs, partly about integrating newcomers into the broader society, and partly, I think, as Mayor Bloomberg spoke at the very beginning, about the promotion of economic diversity, jobs in a variety of areas, not putting it all on an economic monoculture, because as we've seen generally people have tried that, it's worked for a while, and then it doesn't work in the end. We could talk about Detroit and automobiles, or we could talk about people who put too many eggs in the finance basket. The final thing, and this is truly the last point, is and it relates, I think, to the first speaker of the day. Maybe the most important thing is mindset or institutional commitment. I mean, I was struck by Jeff Immelt saying, if you were serious about jobs, you get up in the morning and say, what about jobs? We looked at, see the most successful cities are the ones that purposely created new institutions and or created new goals and said, we want to think about how our regulatory structure impacts businesses. We want to think about how we are going to actually move forward on something. And that I think, it's hard to institutionalize that. And I think that maybe as people recognize we're all in a political environment, political environments are subject to change. And so I think maybe the ongoing challenge for all of the people involved in this process is to simultaneously get that mindset, take it seriously, and then figure out ways of institutionalizing it, carrying it forward, maybe through new organizations, maybe through just being successful enough that other people feel obligated to carry it forward, by creating a brand that recognizes it, or by making the political process more broadly realize that it actually matters. So it has been a long day. I think I want to just say I'm not standing between you and the end of the day, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have, or to direct them to the people who I'm actually summarizing and paraphrasing, since this is all not so much me, I think, as all the people I've been learning from all day long. Don't feel obligated to have questions. But if you do, I'll be happy to take it. That's all right. I think it's for you.
Okay. I'm not going back up there again. I'm just going to turn around and just say first thank you to Richard. That was really extraordinary. I don't know how you did it, but it was wonderful. I hope everybody feels really good about the day today because we've clearly covered a lot. And I hope you get to take it back to your cities. And I know we in New York have learned a tremendous amount from the exchanges. And I just want to, on behalf of Global Partners, Commissioner Marjorie Tiven, and the Mayor's Office, just to thank everybody for participating in the day today and to invite you who are going with us on the bus to just meet us on the bus downstairs, and to everybody else, thank you very much. See you shortly.